Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for week commencing the 2nd of February. I'm going to share with you some of the big themes of the week ahead, then on screen the event chart, which on Monday provides an influential backdrop for the whole 7 days. I'll then go through each of the influences frame by frame to give a clear picture of what we can collectively expect. Please stay with me. I'll then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. And at the beginning of each of those zodiac segments, I'll share the chart wheel of exactly where the planets are for each sign. I'm astrologer PAPRICORN, and once more a very warm welcome. If you're a returning visitor, your views, interactions, likes and comments are truly appreciated. If you're new here or yet to subscribe, please help the channel to continue to thrive and do so now. Now, the big talking point this week is going to be Uranus ending its retrograde on Wednesday, after having retraced its steps initially from the sign of Gemini from September the 6th through about 4 degrees. But Uranus may be going direct and can in some ways help us to be a little bit less stressed about things like resources, our approach to our possessions, perhaps also our need for personal freedom around how we earn money. That's all being very much under the astral microscope, but Uranus is still in a very stressful relationship with Mercury this week. What's the significance of that? And as we come into this week, the potency of the Leo full moon is still cascading its energy into this week and also to next. The influence of full moons is 2 weeks. I'm going to unpack that for you as well. Now, we're also going to see at the very beginning of the week, Venus and Mercury continue to collaborate, but the Sun, like them in Aquarius, is in a more challenging angle to Jupiter. What's the significance? Jupiter in its retrograde in the water sign of Cancer, not on good terms with the Sun in the idealistic Aquarius. And then, as the week goes on, Mercury does emerge from that conjunction to Venus and that very tense right angle with Uranus to move into the sign of Pisces, the last zodiac sign of the horoscope. It is going to go into a retrograde on the 26th of the month, but it is before then going to be joined by Venus and the Sun. And Mercury here is debilitated. What does that really mean? What is the implications? I'm going to go through all of this for you. But on the screen now is the event chart for the week ahead. As ever, we need to be mindful of the 2 luminaries, and they are just coming out of that exact opposition. So you can see the moon's at 14 degrees, the sun at 13 degrees. The moon's move forwards essentially 1 degree. So the energy of that full moon still very much to the fore as we come into this week. But because of the cluster of energy in Aquarius that you can see, the connection we all have to one another, our network, also our long-term planning, our friendships, but our higher values are very much to the fore. So that stellium in Aquarius is very much about we, the collective, whereas the energy of the moon in Leo is much more to do with what we want perhaps as individuals, and that may be something we need to toggle as we go into this week. But as I mentioned, we do have Venus and Mercury, as you can see, 19 and 21 degrees, very close together as we go into this week. They reached an exact conjunction late last week, and that does mean that where we do have very constructive collaborative efforts, there is a chance to still make progress despite the full moon in some ways perhaps giving us some doubt about whether we continue to work closely with others, or if we are working closely with others, are we sacrificing our individuality, which comes from the moon in Leo. But as I mentioned, Uranus is going to be ending its retrograde. It's an annual retrograde of 5 months. What made it different this year is that Uranus had moved into Gemini, if you recall. It was for only 4 short months, but it was at just over 1 degrees in that sign when the retrograde began. So it's rewinding through back into Taurus and now goes direct. But if you have been feeling a little bit stressed out about resources, about how you earn money, about anything to do with possessions, if your values have not quite aligned to other people you're needing to connect with, that may have been obvious through the retrograde. Now, Uranus going direct and will leave the sign of Taurus on the 26th of April, but initially here this week it clashes with Mercury. If we think that Mercury is very much the communicator, but also it can be about precision, and in the sign of Aquarius it can be about our more idealistic energy, and Uranus in Taurus can be more about the money, or what we want to perhaps be a bit more attached to. So if there is something where our points of view or our principles don't align with someone else, something suddenly could happen which creates a lot of tension. But we need therefore to prepare, if we're going to have a discussion, just to make sure that we've got our counter arguments in place. But as the week goes on, as I mentioned, we do have the Sun in a quincunx with Jupiter. The implication here is, despite all this idealistic energy in Aquarius, which is airy but can be a bit detached, Jupiter in its retrograde in the sign of exaltation, Cancer, is just asking us to stay in touch with how we feel. But around friendships, if there are certain people we don't feel quite so close to, even if we have common language or common interests, that could show up a little bit. And then Mercury on Friday dives deep into the water sign of Pisces, where it's detrimented. Now, of all the essential dignities, particularly for Mercury, which, for example, is detrimented in Sagittarius, but I think it has huge strengths there. And in Pisces, it has strengths in terms of writing poetry, music, expressing our ideas that are more creative. All of those can be very constructive. But because Mercury does like precision, through its Virgo influence, and quick communications, the more nebulous, opaque energies of Pisces can just cause a degree of confusion, which could become much more obvious once the retrograde begins on the 26th of February, but I will share more about that then. I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, from Aries through to Pisces next, but I just want to ask you this question. The Zodiac, I feel, does provide a lot of information in terms of what we can generally expect in each week, month, or the year ahead. But nothing will ever give us as much information as being able to read exactly how our personal astrology is unfolding. And if you've not quite made that jump to more serious astrology based on your personal birth data, do check out my reports, because they are fantastic value. They're very, very accurate, and they will give you such a welter of information to guide your moves. It's not just that I'm continuing to run my 50% off offer. It is because I genuinely and passionately think they can truly help you. So for more, please see below for the information. So Aries, your week commencing the 2nd of February. On the screen, your event chart, that big cluster of energy in Aquarius, very much to do with your connections. But Mars, your ruler, is forging a semi-sextile to the North Node as we come into this week. So a mixture of thrust and determination through Mars, but also instinct through the North Node in the 12th house, is definitely going to serve you well. But just know you could find yourself a little bit spoilt for choice, and more than one person may want a piece of your time. It may be around a group activity, it could be around a personal friendship, it may be around someone you're interested in from a romantic viewpoint. Now, if there is someone new showing up for you that you really like, but your friends are not particularly impressed, I think this is the energy of the full moon. But conversely, if you're in a relationship already, but your friends are saying, look, we hardly see you, the energy of that full moon is asking you to perhaps create the time to pivot towards them as well. Now, as this week goes on, we are going to see Uranus end that retrograde. But if your personal finances have felt a little bit unsettled or changeable in general over the last 7 years, it wouldn't be a surprise. But you, because you're very passionate and you can really get on the front foot with new ideas, may have used the more innovative energy of Uranus in a very constructive way. And you can still do that. Just be aware, however, if there is an idea that's calling out to you this week, there is a temptation, I feel, to rush it because of Mercury's square with Uranus. Or if you're talking to a friend or someone you want to collaborate with, or someone at work in a team situation, it doesn't quite get where you're coming from. The frustration this can create could be quite phenomenal, to be honest. But just be aware of the energy of Jupiter. It is still in its retrograde through to the 11th of March, but it is asking you to balance that collective energy of Aquarius, which is friendly, is bubbly, it is progressive, but just stay in touch with your inner feelings. How things feel is incredibly important. And one of the things I like to push back on in terms of the archetype of your sign, yes, you are the first zodiac sign and therefore can get into situations quickly. You do so based on your instincts, and I don't think you get enough credit for that. For sure, not everything you try may come off, but a lot of what you do works out fabulously well, because whilst others are pondering, sitting on their hands, worrying, you're in action, you're making things move, which is really exciting. But at the end of this week, just be aware, with Mercury switching into your 12th house, to be joined by Venus on the 10th, the Sun on the 18th, you could find yourself, as this month goes on, wanting to be a little bit more reflective. I think that is entirely possible. But as far as your long-term finances are concerned, just be aware there could be some more disruption as we go deeper into this month. I'm not telling you this because I want to create any kind of concern. I'm just asking you to be aware of the concept of flexibility, because Uranus is a fixed energy in Taurus and all that energy in Aquarius very fixed. So things could change, but something you've really been interested in could be replaced by something that's actually much better for you, but there could be a little bit of a choppiness in the switchover. But with Mercury moving into that 12th house, that need to be in touch with your instincts is very strong. But you may also find yourself thinking more carefully about the friendships you've got. As much as it has been a very important time recently for connections, it really is a matter of quality over quantity. So Taurus, so we commence in the 2nd of February, begins with the energy of the full moon really very much to the fore. And what that was asking you to do personally was to focus on that classic work-life balance. Because with the cluster of energy in the most prominent part of your chart, your determination to raise your profile, seek out a goal, go for an ambition in a very thrusting way has certainly been to the fore. And because your ruler, Venus, is very close to Mercury at the very start of this week, your people skills are still going to be very important to that. But what about your home and emotional life? If you are being very single-minded in terms of reaching out for that golden prize, just be conscious of the people who are providing the support to you. It may be a partner, it could be family members, it may be friends. And it's also important to address your own need for peace, tranquility and quiet, which the moon in the 4th house, where the moon in Leo is what it is for you personally. But if you are juggling that, I think it is going to be very hard to resist the energy at the start of this week, which is very much about being single-minded about what you want, but how you can also be recognised for your talents. And those don't have to be through the professional sphere. It could be creative talent you have. It may be to do with the arts. It may be to do with a hobby or interest. And your leadership skills can also come very much to the fore at this time. But Uranus, which has been with you all but for 4 months last year, since 2019, March, full time, does end its retrograde on Wednesday. And if you have been feeling a little bit frustrated, or things haven't been moving quite as quickly as you want, especially if you've been wanting to break free or liberate yourself from a situation that has proved somewhat challenging, well, for sure, Uranus going direct will help you. But there may be one part of the plan you've got in terms of world domination that won't still go quite as quickly as you would like this week, and that could create some frustration, because as much as you can articulate your ideas very skillfully at the start of this week, as Mercury moves forwards and clashes with Uranus, if someone's not very responsive, or you're feeling that someone's stuck in their ways, or not open to the brilliant, dazzling ideas that you're generating, it could make you feel very wired up, perhaps even exasperated. So just be aware of that. Also, the Sun in the part of your chart that's very much to do with those ambitions is in a discordant angle to Jupiter, which is in your sector of everyday communication. Now, Jupiter in the third house is delicious, but it is in retrograde at the moment. So if you're not quite getting the results you want this week, and as much as you feel you deserve, and all the effort you're putting in isn't quite seeing you gain the leverage and traction that you feel you should be, just be conscious that that could back up and create a degree of exasperation. But later in the week, Mercury may move into Pisces, where it's technically detrimented, but for you, this is your sector of connections. And it's going to be joined on the 10th by your ruler Venus, and then by the Sun on the 18th. So who you know and what you know are very mutually inclusive. So towards the end of this month, even if you don't get the breakthrough you want this week, just keep the lines of communication open. And after all, the sign of Aquarius is very much about being bubbly, it's about being foresighted, it's about your network, your friendships, and friendships with people in those proverbial high places can definitely be helpful to you. But if the speed of travel is not quite at the pace you want, just be aware that your direction within that travel is actually going to be helpful to you as this month goes on, as long as you're aware that Uranus can create some mischief still, despite going direct. But I will share more about that as this month unfolds. So Gemini, your week commencing the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart. Your brilliant ruler Mercury, still very close to Venus as we come into this week. If you recall, they came into an exact conjunction late last week. So on Monday and Tuesday, if you do need to discuss something that you feel very passionate and excited about, you can do so with extra verve, sparkle and animation. But we are still surfing the energy of the full moon as we come into this week. And the moon for you is in the 3rd house. And of course, Leo energy can be very glamorous and prideful, but also just bear in mind the moon in the 3rd house is not necessarily where we express our emotions quite so successfully. So you could have lots of electric conversations this week. It can be very fast moving, it could be very exciting, but do bear in mind how you feel, because Uranus is going to go direct on Wednesday. It has more recently been back in your 12th house. So if you have within that retrograde been suffering with some frustrations, perhaps felt a bit irritable, it's been more difficult to sleep, you felt rather adrenal, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. But just be aware, despite stationing direct, Mercury, as it moves forwards and away from Venus, does challenge Uranus in a square. If there is something that you're unhappy about, the chances are that that can actually amplify that aspect quite strongly, whatever it is that's going on. And something that is very private to you, or you'd rather keep out of public view, may just come into the open. So just be aware of that. So a very bright start to the week, but if you are having those conversations, stay anchored in your emotion from the full moon, and just be aware that there could be some electric energy at the heart of this week, which particularly puts you on edge. Now, Jupiter, the planet of hope, growth and optimism, but also critically of good fortune, has been in a retrograde and continues to be so in your second house of everyday money through to the 11th of March, and is in conjunction with the Sun through this week. So as much as the Sun's very expansive along with Mars, and Pluto, particularly in the 9th house, has a real appetite to share your philosophies with others, it's possible that if you're thinking about anything speculative, I wouldn't rush if you are considering investing in something, particularly if it's something that's new and outside your past experience. But as the week goes on, we do have Mercury, your ruler, moves right to the top of your chart. Mercury in the 10th house is great if you're not really feeling it around your work. Perhaps all that 9th house energy in your sister air sign of Aquarius is making you think that you need a change. You could be feeling very restless. So Mercury moving onto that 10th house apex can initially give you a need to perhaps check out training, re-skilling, applying for jobs, and that's all good and dandy. But just be aware that Mercury is detrimented in Pisces, and of all the essential dignities, I think Mercury in Pisces can be particularly soggy and distorting because of the co-rulership of Neptune particularly. So if you are pivoting towards some new career opportunities as this week goes on, that's something that will develop more strongly as February unfolds, with Venus and the Sun joining up with Mercury. But just be conscious also that Mercury will go retrograde on the 26th of February, and clarity, which is really important to Mercury, could be at a premium. So if you're discussing something, take notes, send a confirmation email back. If you get a text message about something important, react to it quickly, because things can get a bit blurry with Mercury in your personal 10th house. So Cancer, your week commences in the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart, and your ruler, the moon, starts the week in the sign of Leo and is just starting to separate from the opposition to the Sun that forged the full moon as last week came to a close. Now the moon in Leo does have the potential for a little bit of glamour. Second house for you personally can be about your life foundations, everyday money, but also your self-worth. You may feel that it's appropriate for you to treat yourself to something that just adds to your sense of identity and gives you an extra luster, and why not? But also the cluster of energy in the sign of Aquarius, still very strong for you, the 8th house, very transformational. Transformations can be very dynamic in a positive way, taking us towards something where we're more invested. It can also see things breaking down that don't really work for us. And the irony is that Mars and Pluto, the rulers of Scorpio, which has an echo of the 8th house, still pretty close together as you go into this week. So if you are connecting to someone romantically, your personal magnetism can be extraordinarily strong. What I would say is to bear in mind whether your personal values really align. And also, as we go into this week, Venus and Mercury very close together on Monday and Tuesday is good if you are discussing a long-term financial matter where you do feel aligned to someone. But just be conscious that Jupiter in your sign, exalted, the planet of fortune, is continuing to retrace its steps through to the 11th of March, and is actually in a quincunx with the Sun pretty well for the whole of this week. So balancing where you're invested, where you feel passionate, where you want to be close to someone or want to pursue some kind of financial opportunity, long-term planning, needs to work for you as an individual. And there may be something that just feels a little bit out of kilter. Also, of course, Neptune has now moved right to the top of your chart again. It was there for 6 months last year. It can be inspirational, but it can also be draining and distorting. So when it comes to your work, if you are doing something that you're not really feeling at a soul level, you're going to need to check that out more in the weeks, months and years ahead. But as this week goes on, Uranus ends its retrograde on Wednesday. Uranus in the 11th house, broadly for last year, for 4 months in your 12th house, has over the recent years been making you quite idealistic about the people and the direction of travel that you want to take, and that's a good thing. But you may find as this week goes on, despite Uranus going direct, a tension point between your idealism and the business reality or the financial reality of something you're discussing with someone else. Could be around a contract, could be someone's maybe a little bit possessive or controlling around a financial or business matter. Will it show up in a personal relationship? It's possible, but as the week unfolds, Mercury then moves in what is for you a very strong location, the 9th house, because that can give you the desire, as it's joined by Venus on the 10th, the Sun on the 18th, a desire to perhaps separate yourself from something, liberate yourself from something that's not quite working. But Mercury in Pisces is detrimented, so the need to be sure of the facts is very, very strong. And if you are unsure about anything, I think it's a great time for you to think about some professional advice, whether it's a life coach, some counselling, a business advisor, an accountant, or even a legal representative, because the 9th house is very much about those strands. But equally, you may just want to start to plan by the end of this week, doing something that's more free-spirited, more independent, more to do with travel, higher education, just being a little bit lighter after a period of intense and powerful energies because of the collective in the 8th house, but particularly Mars and Pluto, which through their rulership of Scorpio, that does give an added dimension to that intensity. So Leo, your week commences the 2nd of February forecast on the screen, your event chart. Your ruler, the Sun, continues in Aquarius, and you can see is opposite the Moon in your zodiac sign. And we're just coming out of the full moon in Leo, which brought last week's cosmic proceedings to a close. And that full moon may have brought up quite a lot of energy around relationships, and it can continue to do so over the next 2 weeks. Now, it can be very constructively, because with Mercury, but also the ruler of the 7th house of relating Venus, pretty close together on Monday and Tuesday, if there is someone you're enjoying chatting with, that's a very epiphysic combination, very, very lovely. But if you're in an ongoing tie where you're not feeling heard, seen or respected as much as you would like, the combination of Mars and Pluto can make you more assertive about your boundaries, and quite rightly so. But you may have read that Uranus is going to go direct this week, and that happens on Wednesday. And it's possible in general since March 2019 that your worldly and professional situation has perhaps been a bit changeable or choppy, or maybe you've preferred a role that's given you more independence and flexibility, particularly around how to earn a living, and why not? But even though Uranus does go direct, as this week goes on, Mercury inches forwards and the two come into an exact square. And it's possible that if you work for someone who's very changeable, or perhaps a little bit unpredictable in some ways, that could make you feel somewhat on edge. Also because Jupiter, the planet of spirituality, is still in a very reflective part of your chart and angles to the Sun in a discordant way all through this week. Even if you're in a tie that isn't showing obvious signs of strain, I think Jupiter being there can see you thinking very carefully, will this really meet your future needs, the sign of Aquarius, very much about the future, in a way which really will be fulfilling? And that may be something you're just mulling over. And that contemplation can gain traction with Mercury then moving into the sign of Pisces on Friday. The 8th house. Mercury in the 8th house is good to think about long-term financial planning, shared finances and resources, but the host is not Mercury's favourite position. Pisces is a water sign. It can be a bit distorting because of the rulership of Neptune. And if you are going to be talking about any long-term financial planning or business matters, or you want to be more entrepreneurial or consider a business partnership throughout the rest of this month, just really be aware of the need to set very clear terms of reference. I think that's going to be critical. But if you are enjoying connecting with people at the moment, or collaborating, or there is someone that you can share your different skills or talents with in an uplifting way, I think that energy can still play into this week very, very nicely. It's more about that professional situation or a deeper relationship, or one where you don't feel that there is that respect for how much investment and energy and care that you are taking. So Virgo, your week commences the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart. Your ruler Mercury, you can see, still in house 6 as we start this week, which has an echo of your zodiac sign. So your attention to detail, your appreciation of doing things that have a tangible benefit is highlighted, but particularly because Mercury very close to Venus as we enter this week, suggesting that your charm as much as your productivity can be a real asset. But as last week came to a close, of course, we had that full moon, and for you the moon was in house 12, which can be quite tender. If you work in an environment which you don't particularly enjoy, if there's a bit of an atmosphere, if there are certain people who gain more recognition and are not perhaps as industrious as you, it's something you could really think about. And with Uranus, the planet of freedom, ending its retrograde on Wednesday, in the part of your chart that's very much to do with independence and being more daring, but then coming into, as Mercury moves forwards, a square with your ruler, you may find yourself really considering all the different options you've got. It could create a little bit of stress if you feel that that conscientious part of your nature is in some ways crushing your desire or need to be more expressive, more of a free spirit. And it doesn't just have to be at work, it could be at home. If you're the person who tends to be the one doing more of the chores and other people aren't pitching in, use the energy of Mars and Pluto, which can be more assertive, even dare I say muscular, to let other people know that it's important that they pick up some of the load too. But the Sun this week is in conjunction with Jupiter. And Jupiter's in the part of your situation that's to do with friendships, your long-term plan, your connections. In a way, those connections is a bit Aquarius. But it's possible that even around your friendships, it's not a fair exchange at the moment. So you may have to be a bit more realistic about those. Fortunately, your ruler does move into your opposite sign as the week draws to a close. Now, Mercury is afflicted in Pisces, there's no doubt about it, not least because it's opposite your sign, but also squares the other sign that Mercury rules of Gemini. But in terms of trying to get the communication going, I feel it can be an asset to you because the energy at the heart of this week is quite brittle, and it could see you even feeling a bit stressed out, I feel. And if there are things you need to discuss about who does and contributes what, to get a little bit of a fairer balance in terms of those everyday heavy lifting tasks, then I feel that Mercury in your 7th house can give you the diplomacy but also the listening skills to have an exchange in a way which could just nudge things forwards in a more productive way for you. And in terms of your love life, if you are looking to meet someone new, Mercury moving into your 7th house is the first of 3 major influences, followed by the gorgeous Venus on the 10th, the Sun on the 18th. 18th. So you are going to have opportunities as February develops to connect more with others and not be so preoccupied with life's everyday routines and responsibilities. So Libra, your week commencing the 2nd of February. On the screen, your event chart, your ruler Venus, still very close to the sparkling energies of Mercury. If you recall, late last week, they came into an exact conjunction on Thursday. So there may be something that was sparked then that you still feel very upbeat about as you come into this new week. But of course, last week did end with that powerful full moon in the very glamorous Leo, which for you is your sector of friendships, your long-term plan. So your emotions around those areas are still bound up with the energy as you go into this week, but the collective in your fellow air sign of Aquarius is very much about you expressing your unique creativity, talents, passion, enjoying life, being more frivolous even. Yes, being more frivolous. Why not indeed? But perhaps there is someone that you're involved with, perhaps in a group or collectively or a friend, that may just feel slightly pushed out with the focus you're putting into your situation at the moment. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't still continue to try to express yourself to the maximum, because this is a very unique set of planetary influences, and you deserve to do everything you can to let people know just how charismatic you are, but someone could be a little bit envious about it. Now, Uranus, the planet of freedom, higher truths, the ruler mythology-wise of the sky, very much to do with astrology, I feel, has been retracing its steps more recently back in the part of your chart to do with deep involvements, long-term finances. And if in general those areas have felt very unpredictable, perhaps even challenging, broadly since March 2019, it wouldn't be a surprise. There may have been sudden connections, sudden disconnections, some brilliant and even incredible innovative ideas, but maybe just a sense of being on edge. So Uranus going direct is obviously welcome, but as the week goes on, Mercury steps forwards, getting ready to exit the sign of Aquarius and clashes with Uranus. If there is somebody around you, it tends to be perhaps a little bit needy in terms of your space, perhaps wants your attention a lot, and you feel somewhat inhibited by that, could create a pinch point between you as this week develops. And also Jupiter is right at the top of your chart, pushing you to be optimistic and very progressive around your career hopes and involvements. And because it is in an in conjunction, a quincunx with the Sun, if you're in a job which doesn't allow you to express your talent and flair as much as you would like, the movement of Mercury on Friday into your sector of work and obligations, even though technically Mercury is not at its best in Pisces, it's, because Pisces is a water sign, Mercury likes clarity, it likes facts and figures, it likes crisp communication and accuracy, and Pisces is very complex, very ephemeral. But what Mercury does do there, if you aren't really feeling that you can do what you want in a job that is fulfilling, if it's not serving your soul passion, that's something you can start to think about a lot more throughout the rest of February, because Mercury will be joined by your ruler on the 10th, Venus, then the Sun on the 18th, and all of that's going to see you want to convert the ideas that you're generating at the moment to something more tangible, long-lasting and practical. So it's an exciting week still. I do feel there could be a little bit of tension around certain people if they're not celebrating you as much as you need to be celebrated. You need to gain recognition for what makes you fabulous, gorgeous, talented, alluring. Go for it, Libra. So Scorpio, your week commencing the 2nd of February. On the screen, your event chart. You could see that Mars and Pluto, your two co-regents, still pretty close together. Pluto, for the long term, is asking you to consider some of the deeper emotional changes in your situation, perhaps even around where you live, as much as very close relationships, perhaps with family members, or the relationship with yourself. Now, Mars can be a bit prickly and a bit defensive and impatient in the fourth house. But that combination, if you are wanting to make some practical alterations, will certainly give you a lot of drive. But you can see that Venus and Mercury very close together still. They peaked last week in an alliance. If you wanted to do something more artistic, creative, or decorative at home, they're very helpful as this week begins too. But last week ended with the potency of that full moon. And you can see the moon at the start of this week is right at the top of your chart. In a natal chart, whichever planet is at the top of that northern hemisphere is going to be the most important. So for you, your emotions could be closer to the surface. And because you're someone who can be private, even if you can be very to the point in terms of your observations about other people, your vulnerabilities could seem to be more obvious to others. Whether everyone picks up on them is another matter, but perhaps people who are a little bit more attuned may do. You can also see that Jupiter's up there at the top of your chart and is in a quincunx with the Sun this week. So that fourth house energy to do with feelings, emotion. Jupiter's very much to do with being outgoing, being adventurous, being perhaps open to change. And it's possible that you could be provoked in some ways to alter something before you're quite ready with that combination. But also Mercury steps forwards away from Venus and comes into a square with Uranus. Uranus has been travelling backwards, initially in Gemini, from the 6th of September, more recently back in your sector of relating. If there is a relationship at the heart of your world, and that may be a family tie, it could be with a partner, a flatmate, a lodger, that isn't going quite so well. Because Mercury in the fourth house finds it much more difficult to articulate how we feel, the sign, the host, Aquarius, can be more logical, but not so good for expressing those nuances around emotion. You might feel frustrated, and that could see you blurt something out at the heart of this week if you feel that someone's not being very receptive, not being very sensitive, or someone may accuse you of being a bit blunt and not very open to what they have to say. But by the end of the week, Scorpio, you're going to start to really move into a different phase. We have had such a lot of energy initially in Capricorn at the start of the year, emphasizing your quick communications, and then the collective in Aquarius, that more emotional sphere. But Mercury moves on Friday into your fellow water sign of Pisces, and that's much more playful, it's frivolous. Mercury can be quite a mischievous energy, and in the fifth house, that fun side of your nature gets a bit more permission to come out to play, even if the host is said not to be the best place for Mercury to be. But if you are wanting to talk about something in terms of expressing your talents and flair, it will be important to make sure that you're precise and you get the details sharp, which is more difficult in Pisces. But it's going to be joined by Venus on the 10th, the Sun on the 18th, and the more playful vibe can come through as this month goes on. But I have to tell you that Uranus is going to be continue to be a very potent influence, clashing with the Sun in week 3 in Aquarius through the solar eclipse, clashing with Mars in the last week. So that close relationship, which isn't quite working, there may be more turbulence to come, to be honest, and it may be something that's difficult not to engage with. So that part of you that can be fixed, resistant to change, which maybe is more to do with Mars, but there's that other part of you that when change comes, Pluto, it can do so in a very radical way. So big changes could come for you as this month goes on, despite the potential for a more playful, fun end to this particular week. Sagittarius, your week commencing the 2nd of February. On the screen, your event chart, that cluster of energy in house 3. The third house is about quick communication, can be short journeys, connections with neighbours, siblings, definitely digital communication. So anything that gives you a sense of spark and excitement is very much to the fore at the start of this week, not least because we're emerging from the full moon at the end of last week in the opposite sign of Leo. And you can see the moon's there in the ninth house, which has an echo of your zodiac sign, very much the truth seeker, because the third house can be quick communication, not always necessarily quite so thought through from an emotional perspective. But the ruler of the third house, Mercury, is in a lovely connection still at the start of this week with Venus. And because the moon, as it moves forwards on Monday, goes face to face with both of them, I actually feel there could be some very encouraging and buzzy exchanges on Monday. But it's also worth being mindful of the energy of Mars and Pluto. Now, the third house can be about our beliefs, and those two together can make us quite determined to express them in a very assertive way. So just be conscious of that, because your ruler Jupiter, which is very much to do with philosophies, continues in retrograde in the 8th house, and that's an area that's very much to do with a deeper, more psychological transformation, or it can be about long-term financial planning or shared resources. Now, as this week goes on, the Sun and Jupiter forge an in conjunction 150 degrees. So whatever you're thinking and whatever you're talking about, it needs to be grounded in what really works at a deeper level. So that's where the moon, I feel, as you come into this week in the ninth house, can be a great asset. Even if something is a juggle in terms of your schedule, travel plans, the demands you have, for the moon just reminds you to stick with what really feels rightful for you. But the connection between Jupiter and the Sun suggests if you are discussing something around an investment, shared finances, an entrepreneurial matter, you don't rush things. Now, Uranus has been in a retrograde since the 6th of September, initially in your opposite sign, more recently in the 6th house, where he's been for the most part, all but 4 months, since March 2019. And I feel that Uranus there has at times made trying to get some kind of rhythm or structure into your daily routine somewhat elusive. But you may have also been quite ingenious in some ways, perhaps around your work, self-employment, how you flex in terms of your schedule. But despite Uranus going direct, as the week goes on, Mercury moves forwards and the two come into a sharp right angle. Now, Mercury is going to be the first planet in Aquarius that does this, but will be followed by the Sun in week 3 and Mars in the last week of February. So just be aware that 3-6 energy can create tension. And if you are trying to reform your world and make it more efficient, I wouldn't try too hard this month, because if you do, I think it could be quite stressful. So if you have particular aims and objectives you want to reach, give yourself an achievable to-do list, one which helps you to make progress, but at the same time doesn't make things so brittle that you're ending up with headaches and feeling irritable. However, as the week draws to a close, Mercury does leave Aquarius. It moves into the 4th house, where you just still have Saturn. Now, Saturn, of course, is going to be leaving on the 14th of February, and it won't be back into the sign of Pisces for about 27 and a half years, which is a relief, because I feel the last couple of years, apart from that brief sojourn into Aries last year, has meant that Saturn's been asking some serious questions about your home and emotional life, whether it's been repairs to your property, whether you've moved, whether it's been difficult to feel settled, whether there's been some tensions, greater responsibilities for older family members, kids, whatever it's been, not been easy for Sagittarius. And so Mercury moving into that area to be followed by Venus on the 10th and also the Sun on the 18th is going to be intriguing, because obviously once the Sun gets there, Saturn and Neptune, which of course potential challenges there, have gone. And therefore you might actually start to enjoy your home, emotional and family life in a way which could surprise you as this month goes on. But just be aware there could be a little bit of a jagged edge. What you think you should do and what someone else thinks you should do, whether it's a colleague, family member, just very easy to feel a little bit overstimulated and perhaps a bit edgy with Mercury squaring up with Uranus. However, by the end of the week with Mercury in Pisces, although the fourth house position for Mercury is not the greatest for sharing how we feel, and the host Pisces is quite a challenging location for Mercury, and there is going to be a retrograde from the 26th, just be aware that it's important to keep the dialogue and the flow of communication going with people you're close to, or if you are trying to do anything around a property matter, a rental or an exchange or a purchase, you will need to really make sure that your natural passion and enthusiasm keeps things moving along. Don't just take your eye off what does need to be clarified. But in terms of your emotional situation, that is going to become a more evocative part of your journey through the rest of February, I feel. But this week, for sure, there can be some bubbly exchanges, but just stay in touch with that moon energy of your higher purpose. So Capricorn, your week commencing the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart. We had that full moon at the end of last week, and the moon in Leo is lovely. It's very glamorous. The 8th house can be for you where you want to connect in the most profound, deep way with someone else. But it can also be about long-term resources. And because of the collective in Aquarius, that's seeing you, I think, thinking a lot recently about everyday money, your everyday values, the things you really identify with. So the full moon could bring up something where you're a bit attached and maybe need to be a bit more flexible because of the fixed energy, but also maybe a renewal on an insurance premium or a taxation matter may need your attention, or in shared finances a partner may see something slightly different. But your ruler Saturn is entering the final 2 weeks of its journey through Pisces. It obviously did venture into Aries from the 25th of May to the 1st of September last year, but it is continuing to forge a very constructive link to Uranus. So the two planets which rule the sign of Aquarius are well aligned. Well aligned for you to do things in a well planned, well thought through way, very Capricornian, but also be open to different approaches. But Uranus has been tracking backwards, hasn't it? And initially it was in the part of your situation to do with practicalities. More recently, more to do with innovation, flair, and perhaps even your love life. But as Mercury moves forwards this week, it does square off with Uranus. And that could make you a bit more impulsive with resources. In fact, at the very start of this week, with Venus and Mercury closely together, there may be an item that you're finding is attracting you or has proved to be a little bit irresistible, even at the end of last week when they came into an exact conjunction. And Jupiter, the planet of growth, optimism and hope, continues in your sector of relating. But that could point towards a bit of a pinch point if you and a partner, business or personal, don't have the same alignment around values or expenditure. So that may be a matter, and maybe the square between Mercury and Uranus could bring some tensions to the fore. But by the end of the week, Mercury moves forwards into the sign of Pisces, ready to support initially Saturn, and then Venus will join up with Mercury on the 10th. And perhaps if your exchanges with people over the last couple of years have had some tensions, especially with siblings, neighbours, maybe online, it hasn't always flowed that well for you, I think you can get some relief. And if you've learnt the lessons of Saturn and you've worked with it, what you can gain with the arrival of the Sun in Pisces on the 18th of February is see things speed up, and you can feel much more liberated. If things have felt heavy, or if you've had problems with technology, even a mode of transport over the last couple of years, everything will just seem to shake up and move in a much more fluid way, which is welcome, despite the fact of Mercury technically being in a detriment in the sign of Pisces. So crisp communication is what Mercury appreciates. Pisces doesn't find that easy. But if you are someone who's got ideas which have an instinctive dimension to them as well as a practical component, Mercury in Pisces is terrific. So if you're a creative, brilliant opportunity to get things moving more rapidly as this month goes on. So what you contribute, what someone else contributes, balancing the books, some unexpected paperwork turning up are all possible. And also, if you're trying to align with someone, patience will be needed, particularly if you're feeling that the other person is not so open to doing something in a more inventive or perhaps more progressive way. So Aquarius, your week commencing the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart, and we still have that cluster of energy, that stellium in your zodiac sign. So if ever there was a time to be very singular in your approach, if you have new ideas, you can launch them with a lot of confidence, drive and passion, but also a degree of subtlety and deftness because of the combination between Mercury and Venus, which even in a social context could see new people drawn to you. But last week ended with that full moon in your opposite sign, and you can see the moon is still in the 7th house as you enter this week. So as much as there's a lot of push to focus on what's important to you, keeping mindful of your connections to others will really be very valuable to you. Now, your two ruling planets are very much in the picture this week. Uranus, your modern ruler, goes direct on Wednesday, and Saturn's entering the final 2 weeks of its journey through Pisces. And they're collaborating. And they're collaborating even before Uranus goes direct. So what's that about? Well, Saturn's asked some big questions over the last couple of years about your sense of worth, your value, your foundations, but also about your finances. And Uranus being in the 4th house suggests that where you live or emotional issues have not always been an easy thing the last couple of years. And because Mercury moves forwards as this week goes on and goes into a right angle with Uranus, that desire that you have to manifest your unique individuality may not be received or appreciated by someone close to you, who could actually be a bit distant, changeable, erratic, or it could be you that finds yourself being more outspoken. Also, Jupiter, the planet of optimism and luck, is continuing in your 6th house. It can be to do with your well-being, life structure, work, love of animals, but is in a retrograde, and that and the Sun are not well aligned. So if you're really, really passionate about doing what you want to do for you, Jupiter and Uranus don't necessarily make that easy this week. So the position of the moon at the start of the week perhaps just reminds us Aquarians that it's important to at times yield a little bit. The moon in the 7th house likes harmony. All that cluster of energy in your 1st house wants you to be authentically, totally you, and that's fabulous. Do put your best foot forwards, but just be conscious of how it may be perceived. But later in the week, we are going to see Mercury move out of your zodiac sign and into Pisces, followed by Venus on the 10th, followed by the Sun on the 18th, and Saturn waves au revoir on the 14th. So if you have really been feeling it, in terms of the things I mentioned earlier with Saturn over the last couple of years, but you've really applied yourself. You've tried to get more organised. You've tried to focus on what's really essential. You're much more aware of what your core values are. You've simplified your life. There's less fripperies. You've perhaps become a little bit more thrifty. You can get the rewards. So new finances can be coming in, new income as this month goes on, but it will be on the back of a lot of the creativity, passion and brilliance that stellium in Aquarius is creating. But just be conscious that even if it's a bit frustrating if people don't get onto it straight away or don't lean into where you are, it's because sometimes you're just so far ahead of the game. So Pisces, your week commencing the 2nd of February on the screen, your event chart. Your modern aquatic ruler has now, of course, moved into the sign of Aries. Aries is a fire sign. It's arid for you. It's the second house of resources. You need to feel passionate about how you earn your money over the years to come. But Neptune does forge still a very strong alliance with Pluto. So past experiences and knowledge and skills that you developed can be showcased, but perhaps in a more artistic or creative way with that combination. Now your other ruler, Jupiter, does continue to retrograde still and will do through to the 11th of March, but is going to be in contact with the Sun as this week goes on. But you can see you still have that cluster of energy in the 12th house. Now Pluto's been there full time since November 2024 and may have stirred up some deep psychological debris. Maybe you've been evolving, releasing what no longer serves your greater good. You may have found yourself very reflective, perhaps even cocooning yourself away, and that may and continues to be this week something you have quite an appetite for. But the combination of Mars and Pluto together could be quite volatile. So if there's something from your past that was deeply unfair, an abandonment, a rejection, a loss, an accident that you had that wasn't really supported in the way it could have been, your energies could be somewhat furnace-like, and the energy from that furnace can come up and sometimes somewhat unexpectedly. So even if you're quite a placid Pisces, you may find a little bit of turbulence in your moods up and down. Equally, that combination can see you wanting to reveal something that until now you've kept private, but if you do, that's very courageous and it can help to release it. Now the cluster of energy between Venus and Mercury does hint at the start of this week anyway, that if there is someone you're getting to know quietly, perhaps even secretively, that relationship could be promising. But the angle between Mars and the North Node in your zodiac sign is actually really good. And if there is something from your past, an injustice that has inhibited you over time, remember the North Node is our direction of travel if we choose to seize the opportunity. And that may require you to go with the flow, to just release control and just see where it takes you. And with Saturn leaving your sign on the 14th of this month, I think the last 2 years, which hasn't been easy, the arrival of Mercury later this week in the sign of Pisces is the first signal of better things to come. But your traditional ruler Jupiter does clash with the Sun this week, and if you are trying to connect to someone romantically who perhaps is keeping things a little shielded from you, is evasive, elusive, not very forthcoming in telling you how they feel, that can prove to be very frustrating. I assure you, with the arrival of Venus on the 10th, the exit of Saturn on the 14th, and the arrival of the Sun on the 18th, you're going to be really moving into your power. So if at the present time you're becoming more conscious of who you can't really rely upon, or what needs to be released, or if there's certain parts of your life are coming to a gigantic close, You're in tune with what the heavens are presenting to you. But all of this is a preparation for a new beginning that can be so very exciting for you. But I think the clash between Mercury and Uranus just before Mercury arrives in Pisces at the heart of this week can just be a little bit of a tinterbox. If something has been simmering, someone says something that's careless, inconsiderate, insensitive, you may find it difficult not to let your emotions come to the surface. But release and relief are coming as this month goes on.